What is up, Lakeside Church? My name is Cole Harper. I'm one of the pastors here. What a day, man! I hope things are going well for you guys. It's just been it's been an intense week. I think for the Harper clan in a lot of ways. And for the live stream today, I wanted to give you a little bit of encouragement from something I read in Matthew 16 this morning. Okay. I will say this bears a little introduction though. So I'm one of those guys who I often enjoy trying to mine encouragement from like Bible passages that, I don't know how to put this, a lot of folks have used in discouraging ways in my life, if that makes any sense at all. So I get a lot of joy out of looking at Bible passages for encouragement, and especially those that passages that people have used kind of in discouraging ways in my life, right? So you look at like Matthew 16. That's the whole let him deny himself and take up his cross idea, right? And, when I first became a Christian, most people use that passage to like guilt you into going to Guam and like being a missionary there or something. They'll say, well, take up your cross and follow him. What makes you miserable? That's what you should be doing. I'm like, well, I don't know if that's how that works. But I was spending time in that passage this morning. Let me read it for you real fast, okay? Matthew 16, verse 24 through 26 in particular. Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? What shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Yeah, I mean, not the feel-good verse of the year, because it's one of those deals where, especially if we're not grounded in how the cross and the resurrection work, we can misread that as a kind of works righteousness thing. And there's a much better way to approach this, and I would argue it's the approach that the passage demands. What Matthew 16, 24 and through 26 is, at the end of the day, it's a call to hopefully and soberly embrace the implications of character transformation that Jesus intends to bring about. That's what it is. Matthew 16, 24 through 26 is not about you going to Guam or something because you hate that idea. Or this notion that if something makes you miserable, oh yeah, that's what God wants you to do. That's a sloppy way of approaching that passage. When Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross, it's a call to hopefully and soberly embrace the implications of the character development and transformation Jesus wants to do in you. And that includes embracing, the collateral damage that transformation could produce. We'll put it that way. See, here's the thing. When I actually start changing and growing, in my maturity, in my walk with Jesus, certain fixtures of what it means to be me, historically, friends, places we go, daily routines, modes of self-talk even, those fixtures will start changing or disappearing altogether. You feel that? When we start changing and growing, certain fixtures of what it's meant to be you, what it's meant to be me, maybe for years, will start changing or disappearing altogether. And that can actually be kind of traumatic. You got to bear in mind that this passage is coming right off the heels of when, Peter was like, Jesus, you're not going to have to go through a crucifixion or anything. And Jesus goes like, get behind me, Satan. In other words, Peter was saying Jesus' mission didn't include a kind of sacrifice that he knew it would. And our mission in many ways here, yes, it's to make disciples, but it's also to conform ourselves to the new reality Jesus brought in his death and resurrection. And it's to be actual first fruits of that heaven on earth in our own diluted, imperfect way. We start looking like Jesus, in other words, okay? This is where you realize that Jesus had a lot of courage. And Jesus is calling us here in our walk with him to have a lot of courage. It's courage in a voluntary march to the cross, right? And he says, come die with me. Come let parts of yourself that shouldn't be here still, let them die. That takes courage. And we'll have to emulate that courage in our own transformation. There's a guy named G.K. Chesterton. He had the best visual picture of courage I've ever heard of. It's really, really cool. Here's what he says. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he is to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water and drink death like wine. That's what courage was to Chesterton. And I get that. That rings true in a way, right? So there's a calling on us to not fight the strangeness of the noble things being asked of us by the Spirit in our circumstances right now, in your diagnosis, in your job situation, parenthood, grandparenthood, you being a wife, you being a husband. There's a call to a kind of loving trust and obedience that really goes against the grain of what we thought it would look like. And Jesus says, it's okay, lean into that. That's not gonna destroy you. It'll destroy the life you sought to save by keeping it safe. It'll destroy that, but you'll gain your life in the end. You will have life because you let the things which you thought would be the case, the things I thought would be the case in my own flesh, die. There's actually life in that. So he's saying, willfully accept the strangeness of a different life, even though it feels dreadful in the meantime. Now, that's all really easy to say, I know. It borders on cliche, and I hate cliche, and I hope you do too. That being the case, I think I've seen two tricks. That's a gross word, but I'm going to use it. I've seen two tricks that help me die with Jesus in a way that I experience a resurrection of desires and aspirations in a way, in my character too. There's two tricks I found, right? The first trick is to hate the right things. Or said another way, let the gospel redirect your rage. It always slays me when I hear folks talk about the enemy as if it's a person and not a spiritual enemy. And I love how Paul just says, you all know we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, right? But against powers and principalities in the heavenly places. Like, that's a thing, right? We do wrestle against those. We wrestle against the forces of sin and corruption, both in the world and in the mirror. You feel that? So we let the gospel redirect our rage. In other words, we rage against the reptile, the serpent, but not against the reptile's prey. I'm not the one who coined that, but it is helpful. Rage against the reptile, not against its prey. So I think we hate the right things and redirect our sense of maybe vitriol at times, and use it to accept the change we're demanded to make. And here's how we do it. You have to hate what obsessing over a toxic boyfriend or girlfriend does to you more than the thought of being alone. You hate what being an obsessive boyfriend or girlfriend does to you in a toxic relationship more than you hate the idea of being alone for a while if your thing is getting caught in a toxic relationship over and over again. You have to hate waking up at 2 p.m. every day in a trashed apartment surrounded by delinquency notices more than the stress of learning a new job. and not going out to eat for a few months. We accept the change partly by cultivating a hatred for the mayhem our sinful inclinations cause. The bad habits, all of that, your junk. We have to hate being estranged from friends or family members more than we do the feud or grudge we've been nursing. That's the first thing. Redirect your rage. I always loved that passage in the New Testament where it says, Jesus endured the cross for the joy set before him, despising the shame. Right? It's kind of like what Jesus says, where the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and violent men take it by force. This is what he's talking about. He's not talking about like the Crusades or something. He's talking about a balanced and holy militance on the forces of corruption in your life, in my life. So that's the first thing. The second trick to embracing, that call to transformation and the joy, I would remind us, that comes with that, is to let go of the familiar when we have to. Like, not just for the sake of making things hard. It's letting go of the familiar that keeps us imprisoned to sinful, corrupt attitudes, behaviors, stuff like that. Okay? Let go of the familiar. Here's what I mean by that. 9 times out of 10, we feel the most at home when we know how to control things, right? That's what makes a shower in your house or apartment better than the bathroom at the MGM Grand. Why? Well, because you know how to turn your shower on, right? It's home, so to speak. The familiar is where you're most suited to leverage everything around you to work for you and not against you in the short term. Okay? There can be a problem with that, though. The problem is the realm of the familiar is often where we become accustomed to surroundings that we learn to be okay with, even if those surroundings are terrible. We make peace with horrifying, corruptive things, practices, betrayals, deceitfulness. We make peace with those things and make them work for our short-term benefit, but neglect how they'll destroy us in the long run. The long-term bill they'll leave for us, right? That's the tragedy of sin. It makes us participate in our own destruction. It's like when you read of war crimes and people have to dig their own mass grave, before they're placed in it. That's what sin does. It makes you a willing participant in the things that destroy you and the world. And there are times where we'll have to let go of what we have come to think of as normal in order to experience liberation from those forces. Okay? Maybe you've heard of the cliche, the hell you know is better than the hell you don't. And I know what they mean by that. It's because, at least in the hell I know, before I pursue recovery and try to get clean, or before I actually talk to my spouse about stuff I'm struggling with and not just sweeping it under the rug, right? In the hell I know, at least I know where the bathroom is. At least I know what to expect. But the call to being forthright and stepping into the light, right, is that you are exchanging the known, even though it's kind of terrible at times, for the unknown, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen when you do that. That's scary. That's why we need courage. You have to leave certain things, practices, behavior, but you're not sure if you can. Because the world out there, maybe it's recovery, maybe it's coming clean on, a porn addiction you have, maybe it's getting things out into the open about corruption you see around you. That stuff can destroy you. And you're afraid of what life looks like without those things, even though they're kind of terrible at times. You won't have the same friends. You won't have the same little rituals in your life. It's because we haven't learned to control anything outside of the domain we've learned to make peace with. But the only way we can grow and thrive in our life, and I mean that, not in the things actually are terrible, but, because I'm a Christian, it'll be okay. No, the actual way to enjoy your life in a real, substantive way is to be more afraid of staying where you are than being afraid of what you're afraid might happen if you act. You have to be more afraid of staying where you are than what might happen if you embrace the necessary sacrifice to your development and your growth in Jesus. We often think the risk comes in taking the plunge. And that's true. There's also a risk in not jumping. There's a risk of staying exactly where we are and letting the balance accrue over time to produce a behemoth of misery that we can't escape. The way we escape it, the way we escape the corruption within us, is to die, in a sense. It's to bear under the cross of Jesus. It's to die to the way you things hoped would go at times. To die to the zest for revenge or getting even. And to do that, we have to redirect our hatred to the things we should hate. And we need to let go of the familiar if the familiar is what's corrupting us. Tempting us to throw in the towel of our faith. There's a lot of death and resurrection in the Christian life. How is this passage encouraging? Which is how I started all of this off. It's encouraging in this sense. If your life is painful, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. If your life is painful at times, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means that death for a while hurts. But nothing that dies in Jesus will stay dead. That's what it means to believe into him. We will experience the reality of Jesus' resurrection when we are pulled out of our mausoleums, out of our caskets one day at the day of resurrection. But we will also experience a kind of resurrection of our vision, of our hopes for what life could be. That'll come too. He has not abandoned you. If you find yourself on a Via Dolorosa, so to speak, you will fit right in. Let me pray for you guys. As you work your way toward maturity in Jesus, and I work my way toward maturity in Jesus. Father, thank you that you cannot leave us or forsake us. You don't know how. It's not in your nature. And you will let nothing of our pain go to waste. I ask in Jesus' name that for those that things feel like super hopeless right now, those that know there's a path forward, but they don't know if they have the strength to take it, if they have the courage to take the plunge, to have those conversations, to put their junk on the table, that kind of thing. I ask that they would be like folks pushing on an open door. That they would find that they are actually made for that moment. And you tailor make grace for making necessary sacrifices on the road to life. I mean, actual life and thriving. There are a lot of competing sources of quote unquote joy that tempt us often. Pacifism, not rocking the boat, substance abuse, escapism in just like endless hours of Netflix, that sort of thing. There's so many ways, there's so many shelters we run to avoid dealing with the big questions. Jesus, I'm just asking that you would call us out of the wind and that we would begin to feel like ourselves. That you would show us how to get on that cross and how to die in the right ways. Not because you're a killjoy, but because in the kingdom, for whatever reason, the way up is down. You are our hero, Jesus, and you are our best friend. We love you. We thank you. We ask these things in your name only. Amen. I love you guys. Thank you so much. My dog was actually good and didn't come in here and make a ruckus during this whole thing. So, all right, go get him. Kick butt, take names.